Angela Moore had worked table 9 for 2 years without attracting a single person's attention. She had worked very hard to make that happen. She knew which tables liked their water refilled before they asked. She knew which guests wanted 2 bread baskets and which ones would only use 1. She knew which conversations were meant to be heard and which ones were meant to stay at the table. She had trained herself to let language flow past her the way music does in a store: present, acknowledged, and then released. She had been pretending for 2 years that the 4 languages inside her and the 8 years of a career she had built before this job were things that happened to someone else once, a long time ago. She was very good at pretending. She had learned to be good at it because the alternative was carrying, in a public room every single day, the weight of what had been done to her. And she could not afford that. She had rent to pay and a mother to look after and a job to keep. So she carried the bread basket instead. And then table 9 got a party of 8 on a Thursday in November. The American side came in first. Gerald Whitman wore a cream suit and smiled like a man who had already decided how the evening would end. His attorney, Patrick Hale, sat at his elbow. 2 other Whitman Corporation executives filled out the row. Then the Korean side came through the entrance. 3 staff members, an assistant in a powder blue blouse, and last, the man who made the room reorganize itself around him simply by walking into it. Park Jin-ho wore a navy suit and a forest green tie. He moved to his seat without looking at the room. He sat down, placed his hands flat on the table, and looked at the documents in front of him with the patient concentration of a man who intended to understand every single word. Angela brought water. She brought bread. She answered one question about the menu special and returned to the service station near the east wall. The Korean side of the table spoke quietly among themselves. Kevin Cho, the translator, carried each exchange across to English with practiced smoothness. Angela had been on her feet since 4 and she had 5 other tables to manage and she was not listening. The language moved past her the way it always did. And then Jin-ho set down his water glass and asked in Korean whether the draft contract preserved Park Technology's right to 70% of the commercial licensing revenue in North America. He asked it clearly in a careful and deliberate voice. It was not a complicated sentence. It was the kind of sentence a precise man asks when he wants to be certain before he signs anything. Kevin Cho turned to the American side of the table, smiled, and said in English that Mr. Park was very satisfied with how the evening was going and was looking forward to the formal signing ceremony. Gerald Whitman beamed and said he was thrilled to hear it. Jin-ho nodded, satisfied, believing an answer had been given to a question that had never been heard. Angela stood at the service station with the water pitcher in her hand and felt the cold arrive in her chest. She recognized it immediately. She had felt it before, in a different room, in a different life, the moment she understood that someone was being taken from and nobody in the room was going to say a word. She had stayed quiet that time. She had watched what staying quiet cost. She had been paying the cost of it every single day for 2 years. She picked up the water pitcher. She walked to table 9. She refilled Whitman's glass. Hale's glass. The 2 men beside them. She moved around the table, slow and unhurried, and reached Park Jin-ho's glass. She poured. She set the pitcher down carefully. And she leaned forward just slightly so that only he could hear and said in Korean, low and steady, "Excuse me, sir. Your translator just told this side of the table something completely different from what you asked. I thought you should know." The room did not stop moving. Dishes still clattered in the kitchen. Conversation still ran at the tables around them. But the air at table 9 changed in the way that air changes when something irreversible has just been said. Jin-ho looked up at her. His eyes did not change. His expression did not change. But his hands, which had been flat on the documents, went still in a way that was different from how they had been still before. "Say that again," he said. In Korean. And Angela said it again. Word for word. Calm and clear and without apology. Gerald Whitman looked between them with a smile that was still in place but had stopped reaching his eyes. Kevin Cho had gone the color of old paper. "Now here is the question I want you to sit with." Angela Moore had nothing to gain from saying a single word. She had a job to protect. She had a mother depending on her. She had spent 2 years building a life small enough to be safe. She could have refilled that glass and walked back to the service station and gone home at 11 and nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed her. But she leaned forward and told the truth to the most powerful man in the room. If you were standing at that service station with that water pitcher in your hand, knowing what she knew, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have walked away? Subscribe to this channel right now and ring that notification bell. Because what Angela finds in those contract documents, and the name she is about to recognize, is something you will not want to find out secondhand. Drop a comment below and tell me honestly, would you have spoken up? Angela Moore woke up that Thursday morning to the sound of rain on the kitchen window and the smell of her mother's coffee. She lay still for a moment, listening to the water come down the glass. The apartment was on the third floor of a building in the South Loop, and on rainy mornings the city pulled itself inward and went quiet in a way that Angela appreciated. Those mornings did not ask anything of her. She got up at 7:15, pulled on her burgundy robe and went to the kitchen. Brenda Moore was already at the table with her Bible and her coffee, wearing her yellow house slippers and a cobalt blue housecoat. She looked up when Angela came in and said, "Oatmeal is on the stove." "I see it." Angela took a bowl from the cabinet. "Evening shift today?" "Starting at 4. Brenda watched her daughter fill the bowl and bring it to the table. "You slept." "Enough." Brenda did not push. She had learned, in the 2 years since everything fell apart, that Angela did not respond to pressure. She responded to steadiness. So Brenda provided that: oatmeal, coffee, and the quiet dignity of a morning without demand. Angela had not always been this careful with herself. There was a version of her that had been open and certain. The version that had graduated from the University of Illinois with a linguistics degree and a clear picture of where she was going. She had gone straight into Monroe Global Consulting, a corporate language and translation firm that handled contracts, litigation, and executive negotiations for clients across 4 continents. She had been good at it. She had been exceptional at it. 8 years of building. A senior consultant role by 28. A client list that trusted her specifically, not just the firm. Fluency in 4 languages maintained with the same care other people gave to exercise. Daily, intentional, grateful. And then a colleague named Brian Holt decided that her work on the Park Industries translation project was worth taking. He submitted her research under his name. When she raised it, the firm ran an internal review and found her guilty of falsifying her own timeline. She had not had the documentation to prove otherwise. The process lasted 4 months and ended with her termination and a non-disclosure agreement written in a way that kept her from speaking publicly about what had happened. She was 29. She had no job, no professional references she could use freely, and a legal agreement that tied her hands. She found the waitressing job at the Hazel Room 6 weeks later and had been there since. The Hazel Room was, as restaurants went, a good place to work. The clientele were wealthy and generally polite. The tips were reliable. The manager, George Abrams, was fair and consistent. Her coworker Tomas Rivera was warm and perceptive and good company during the long sections of a busy Friday. She had also, over time, found a kind of peace in the simplicity of the work. You showed up. You did the task. You went home. Nobody asked about her credentials. Nobody asked about her future plans. She was just Angela at table 5, Angela with the wine list, and in that smallness she had found a way to breathe again. She arrived at the Hazel Room at 4 and changed into her uniform, the emerald green server's vest over a white blouse, black trousers, her hair pinned up in a neat bun at the back of her head. She and Tomas worked the early section together. "Big party booked for table 9 at 7, Tomas told her as the evening got underway. 8 people. Corporate. International, I heard. Do you know who?" He shrugged. "Whitman Corporation is the host. The guests are from Seoul." Angela nodded and went back to her tables. The dinner rush came in the way it always did, wave after wave, and she moved through it the way she always moved. Steady and present and making herself invisible to everything that did not directly require her attention. She took orders, refilled glasses, answered questions about the menu, carried plates, and circled back through her section with the rhythm of someone who had done this enough times that the body knew the route without the mind having to direct it. The table 9 party arrived at 6:57. She saw the American side first, 4 men in expensive suits, led by a silver-haired man with a broad and practiced smile. Then the Korean side came through the main entrance, and Angela looked up from her station and felt something move in her chest that she could not quite name. It was not recognition exactly because she did not know this man. It was more like the awareness your body has of a shift in temperature before your mind has registered it. The man at the back of the Korean group was not the loudest. He was not performing. He walked into the room and the room changed around him anyway, the way a room does when someone inside it is entirely certain of who they are and has no need to prove it to anyone present. He sat down. He placed his hands on the table. He looked at the documents in front of him. Angela went to table 9 with water and bread. She answered a question about the menu from the silver-haired man and returned to the service station. The conversation at the table shifted between English and Korean as the courses progressed. Kevin Cho, the translator in a well-cut navy blazer, was smooth and fast, carrying exchanges across the language line with practiced ease. Angela was not trying to listen. She was keeping her attention on her section, on the rhythm of the room, on the timing of her tables. But the language was inside her. It did not require effort to receive. It arrived the way your own name does when someone calls it across a crowded room. You hear it even when you are not trying to. She was at the service station, making a note on her order pad, when the man in the navy suit set down his water glass and spoke. He asked about the licensing rights. He asked it clearly, in a low voice that carried the care of someone who had waited for the right moment in the conversation. He wanted to confirm the 70% commercial licensing structure. The question was specific and fair. Kevin Cho smiled and turned to the American side and told them that Mr. Park was very satisfied and looking forward to the signing ceremony. The silver-haired man stretched out his hand. Angela's hand was resting on the water pitcher at the station. She thought about 2 years ago. She thought about the room she had been in when someone had taken what was hers, and nobody in the room had said a word, not even her. She thought about what silence cost. She had been paying that cost daily for 2 years and the interest on it never went down. She picked up the pitcher. She walked to table 9. She refilled glasses, moving slowly around the table. When she reached the man in the navy suit, she refilled his glass, set the pitcher down gently and leaned forward just slightly. She said it in Korean. Low and calm. The translator just told the other side of the table something completely different from what he had been asked. She thought he should know. The table did not stop. The room did not stop. But the man looked up at her and every bit of his attention arrived at once. He was not startled. He was the kind of man who had prepared himself for surprises. But the quality of his focus changed, became sharper and more present. Say that again, he said. In Korean. So Angela said it again. She told him what he had asked. She told him what Kevin Cho had said in its place. She said it clearly, without hesitation, and when she was done she picked up the water pitcher and stepped back. Gerald Whitman looked between Angela and Jin Ho with a smile that was still functioning but had stopped being warm. Kevin Cho had gone very still. Jin Ho looked at Angela for one measured moment. Then he excused the table in Korean and asked everyone to give him 5 minutes. Nobody moved for a beat. Then they did. Angela returned to the service station. Tomas appeared at her elbow almost immediately. What just happened at 9? He said quietly. I'm not entirely sure yet, Angela said. But she was entirely sure. Kevin Cho left table 9 without making eye contact with anyone. He walked through the main dining room and out toward the lobby with his head down and his hands pressed flat inside his jacket pockets, the posture of a man trying to keep himself collected in a public place. Angela watched him go and noted that he did not look back. Gerald Whitman and his team had moved to the bar at Jin Ho's request, which they accepted with the carefully managed patience of men who understood that the client required accommodation. Whitman kept his smile operational. His eyes, however, were tracking the room. Min Ji-yoon, Jin Ho's assistant, remained at the table. She looked once at Angela, with an expression that was hard to read fully, and then at her employer. One of Jin Ho's staff members, a man in a dark blue suit, approached the service station. He spoke to Angela in Korean. He said that Mr. Park would like to speak with her privately if she was willing. Angela looked toward the private dining room where Jin Ho had moved. She thought briefly about George Abrams, who would have questions. She thought about whether this was wise. Then she thought about Kevin Cho's face. Yes, she said. I am willing. The private dining room at the Hazel Room had a long rectangular table, dark wood-paneled walls, and clean white light from the overhead fixtures. Jin Ho was standing at the far end when Angela came in. He did not sit until she did. He waited until the door was closed. Then he said in Korean, "Where did you learn to speak like that?" University of Illinois, Angela said. Then 8 years of professional practice. As a translator? As a corporate linguist and language consultant. He looked at her for a moment. Then he spoke in Korean again, this time with a sentence that was more complex. He asked her to explain in precise terms the difference between a licensing agreement structured around gross revenue and one structured around net revenue, because the distinction was relevant to the documents on the table. Angela answered without pausing. She explained the difference clearly. Then she added, without being asked, that the contract currently on his table used both terms in a way that would be easy to conflate in translation if the interpreter was not being careful, or was not trying to be. Jin Ho was quiet for a moment. What did Kevin Cho actually say, he asked, when I asked about the percentage? He told them you were satisfied and looking forward to the signing, Angela said. He did not address the licensing question at all. And before that? Earlier in the evening? Angela thought back through the conversation she had not been trying to hear. The language had arrived anyway. She described 2 earlier exchanges where Kevin had translated something softer or simpler than what had been said. She was careful to distinguish between what she was certain of and what she was less confident about. Jin-ho listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for several seconds. "You were not assigned to that table to listen," he said. "You just heard." "Yes." "And you said something anyway." "Yes." He looked at her. There was assessment in it, the kind of honest evaluation a person makes when a decision with real consequences depends on what they conclude. "Why?" he asked. Angela considered the answer that would sound right in this room to this man. Then she set that aside. "Because someone did the same thing to me once," she said. "And nobody said a word. I know what that costs." He did not ask her to elaborate. He nodded once, slowly. "Wait here," he said. He was gone for approximately 15 minutes. Angela sat at the long table and listened to the muffled sounds of the restaurant through the wall. Plates. Low voices. The particular rhythm of a dinner service. She had spent 2 years inside that rhythm and she knew every note of it. When Jin-ho returned, Min Ji-yoon came with him. His staff member in the dark blue suit followed. Jin-ho sat down and opened a leather portfolio. He placed a sheet of text in front of Angela. A paragraph from a Korean business agreement, technical and specific, the kind of language that sat between legal and commercial in ways that were easy to misread. "Read it," he said. "Then give me the formal English version." Angela read it. She translated it. She gave him the English in formal contractual language and then noted 2 terms in the original Korean that each carried more than one valid English interpretation, explaining the difference and the context that determined which was correct. Min Ji-yoon, watching, said something quietly to Jin-ho. She said the translation was accurate. The note about the dual meanings was correct. "Minji spent 4 years at a translation firm in Seoul before she came to work for me," Jin-ho said. "She is not a business interpreter, but she knows enough to verify what you just did." "I understand," Angela said. He closed the portfolio. "I need to make some calls tonight," he said. "I would like to ask you to come to my hotel tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I have questions about the contract documents that I believe you can help me understand." He phrased it as a request. He was a man accustomed to things happening at his direction, and he was phrasing it as a request. That meant something. "I can do that," Angela said. He slid a card across the table. A hotel name and suite number, written in Minji's clean handwriting. "One more question," he said. "Yes." "Why are you a waitress?" Angela looked at him. "Someone took something from me," she said. "I have not finished getting it back yet." Jin-ho looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Angela left the private dining room, returned to the service station, put on her apron and finished her shift. At the end of the night, while she rolled silverware, Tomas appeared beside her and was silent for almost a full minute, which was not like him. Then he said, "Are you going to tell me what happened in that room?" "Not tonight," Angela said. "But soon." She looked at him. For the first time in 2 years she felt something shifting in her chest, not breaking open, but moving the way frozen ground moves when the temperature finally changes. "Maybe soon," she said. Angela wore her cobalt blue blouse to the hotel. She had 3 good blouses, the blue, a deep burgundy, and a forest green she saved for occasions that called for something considered. She chose the blue because it was the color she felt most herself in, not performing, not dressed up for someone else's idea of who she should be. Just herself. The hotel was on Michigan Avenue, the kind of building that announced its own seriousness without trying. Angela crossed the lobby in her blue blouse and dark trousers and a pair of low heels she had owned since before the restaurant, and she rode the elevator to the 14th floor with the controlled steadiness of someone who had once walked into corporate rooms for a living and was finding, quietly, that she still knew how. Min Ji-yoon opened the suite door. She bowed slightly and stepped back. The suite was large and quiet, with high windows looking out over the river. Jin-ho was at the round table near the windows with coffee and a spread of documents. He rose when she came in. He gestured to the chair across from him. Angela sat. He poured coffee for both of them, which she had not expected. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the invitation," she said. He looked at her. "Yesterday you said someone took something from you. I would like to understand what you meant if you are willing to say." Angela had thought about this on the train. She had thought about how much to share, and in what order, and whether it was wise to say any of it to a man she had known for less than a full day. Then she had decided that she had started this by telling the truth and that she intended to keep doing that. So she told him. She told him about Monroe Global Consulting. She told him about the 8 years she had spent building a career she was genuinely proud of. She told him about the Park Industries translation project, which she had worked on alone over 3 weeks, and about Brian Holt, who had submitted her documentation under his own name. She told him about the internal review that had lasted 4 months and ended with her termination and a non-disclosure agreement that kept her from speaking publicly about what had happened. She told him about the Hazel Room. About the 2 years of making herself smaller than she was because small was the only shape she could afford right then. She told it without particular emotion, because she had passed the stage of crying about it. She was in the stage of simply knowing what happened, holding it clearly and moving through it one day at a time. Jinho listened to all of it. He did not offer the reflexive sympathy she had learned to be tired of. He just listened, fully, with the same concentrated quality she had noticed at table 9. When she finished, he was quiet. "You said you have not finished getting it back," he said. "That is right. What does getting it back look like?" Angela thought about it honestly. "Working," she said. "Using what I actually know. Not pretending I am less than I am." He nodded. "I need an interpreter for the remainder of my time in Chicago," he said. "Not only for meetings. For every conversation, every document review, every call with my team in Seoul. I need someone who will tell me exactly what is being said, without softening it or reshaping it. I need someone who understands that precision in language is not a courtesy. It is a necessity." He paused. "I would like you to take that role. For the next 2 weeks, or however long it takes to resolve the situation with this contract. I will pay you a daily rate that I think will feel significant to you, and I will put it in writing today." Angela looked at him. She had learned, in the last 2 years, to be careful about things that arrived at exactly the right time. She had learned that not every extended hand was offered in good faith. She had paid for the lesson of not verifying that. But she looked at this man, with his documents and his coffee and his way of listening as if every word carried actual weight, and she thought about 2 years of moving through rooms where nobody asked her to bring what she actually had. "Yes," she said. "I accept. And I want you to know this means more to me than I know how to say right now." Jinho nodded. He reached into the portfolio and produced a single printed page. He slid it across the table. "The daily rate is here," he said. "Read it. If anything needs to be adjusted, tell me." Angela read the page. The rate was 4 times what she made in a full day at the Hazel Room, including tips. She looked up at him. "This is more than fair," she said. "It reflects what the work is worth," he said simply. They spent the rest of the morning reviewing the contract documents. Jinho walked her through what he believed the deal was structured to deliver: a 60-40 revenue split favoring Park Technologies, a licensing arrangement that kept North American commercial rights under Park Technologies' control while allowing Whitman Corporation to distribute the AI processing system, and a 5-year term with renewal rights. Then Angela read the contract herself. She read it slowly, the way she had been trained to read documents that carried real consequence, looking not only at what the words said but at the space between them, the way a sentence could be technically accurate and functionally misleading at the same time. By noon she had 3 pages of notes and a tight, precise feeling in her chest. "This contract," she said, "does not say what you believe it says." Jinho put down his coffee. "Tell me," he said. Angela walked him through it section by section. She moved between English and Korean as the work required, reading the English legal text and translating the practical meaning into Korean for Jinho, then translating his responses back into formal English so they could note them against the document. It was the kind of work she had done in conference rooms for 8 years, and it came back to her the way your first language comes back when you have been away from it. Immediately, fully, with a rightness that was almost physical. The picture was not complete yet. They needed Jinho's sole attorney, Dr. Han Sung-jae, to verify the more technical clauses, and Minji had already sent a message to arrange a call for the following afternoon. But what Angela could see clearly, even before the full legal analysis, was that Whitman Corporation's contract contained a pathway to claim full commercial licensing rights in North America, not shared rights, but full control, through a clause buried in paragraph 18 that could be triggered by a payment structure that Park Technologies was unlikely to meet by year 3. Jinho read the clause himself after she marked it. He read it twice. "If I had signed this at the ceremony," he said in Korean, "what would have happened? Within 3 to 4 years, Angela said, you would have made a payment that fell slightly short of what this clause required. Whitman would have had legal grounds to claim full North American licensing control. You would have retained ownership of the technology itself, but you would have lost the commercial rights in this entire market." He looked at the document. "He has been building this for some time," he said. "It appears that way, yes." He closed the contract. He looked at the river through the high windows. Angela let him be quiet because she understood by now that he needed silence to think rather than noise to fill the space. "We will talk to Dr. Han tomorrow," he said finally. "Until then, please do not discuss what we found with anyone outside this room." "Of course," Angela said. She left the hotel at 2 in the afternoon. She walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop she liked, white-tiled walls and good bright lighting, and ordered a tea. She sat at the counter by the window and let her mind begin to settle after the concentrated work of the morning. She was halfway through the tea when the chair beside her pulled back and Patrick Hale sat down. He was not in a suit. He wore a gray sport coat and dark trousers, which made him look slightly more casual than he was. He set his coffee on the counter and looked straight ahead for a moment, as though he had simply stopped in on his way somewhere. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You are a waitress at a restaurant in the South Loop. 40,000 a year on a good year. Less, most likely." Angela said nothing. "You have a complicated history," Hale said. "Monroe Global, I believe. That situation could become more complicated or it could be left where it is. Those are the available options." He turned and looked at her then. His gray eyes were flat and entirely steady. "Mr. Whitman has a great deal of goodwill in this city," he said. "Partners. Contacts. People who make decisions about employment and professional reputation. He also has people who look into things when he asks. He asked them to look into you." He paused. "I am not here to make threats," he said, which was the exact sentence people used when that was precisely what they were doing. "I am here to suggest that a woman in your position would do herself a great service by returning to her tables and allowing this particular matter to resolve itself between the relevant parties." He picked up his coffee, stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without waiting for a response. Angela sat at the counter for 5 minutes. Her tea was still warm. She finished it. Then she took out her phone and called the number on the card Jinho had given her. Minji answered and put her through. "Something happened," Angela said. "I need to tell you." 20 minutes later she was back in the hotel suite. She sat down across from Jinho and told him about Patrick Hale, word for word, without leaving anything out and without minimizing it. She was steady while she described it. When she finished, Jinho was quiet for a moment. "He mentioned Monroe Global," he said. "Yes. That means Whitman has had you looked into. Which means he now considers you a problem." I understood that when he sat down. Jinho looked at her. "I would like to assign 2 members of my security team to accompany you when you leave this hotel. Not because you cannot manage yourself, but because Hale coming to find you at a coffee shop tells me this will not be the last approach." Angela thought about it. A year ago, 2 years ago, she might have said she did not need anything from anyone. She had learned, in the time since then, that needing help and accepting it gracefully were not weaknesses. They were the things that kept a person standing when the weight of something got heavy. "I accept that," she said. "And I am grateful." Jinho spoke briefly to Minji in Korean. Minji made a call. Mr. Kwon, quiet and professional, appeared in the doorway within 10 minutes. While they waited, Jinho looked at Angela across the table. "What Hale did today tells me more about the seriousness of this situation than anything I have read in those documents," he said. "A man who sends his attorney to a coffee shop to speak to a waitress is a man who is afraid." "Of what?" Angela asked. "Of you," Jinho said. "Of what you know. And of what you are willing to say." Angela looked at him. She had not thought of herself, in 2 years, as someone that a powerful man would be afraid of. The idea settled in her chest in a way that was strange and warm at the same time. "Then I will try to be worth being afraid of," she said. Jinho did not smile often. She was learning that about him. But the expression that crossed his face at that moment was close enough that she recognized it. The video call with Dr. Han Sung-jae began at 2 in the afternoon. He appeared on the screen in a Seoul office where every object looked deliberately placed. Books in clean rows, documents in neat stacks, a single cup of tea at the right corner of the desk. He greeted Jinho formally and greeted Minji. When his eyes reached Angela, he paused with polite curiosity. Jinho introduced her in Korean. He said she was his North American linguistic consultant and that her analysis of the contract documents was what had brought them to this call. Dr. Han nodded at Angela. "Walk me through what you found," he said in Korean. Angela walked him through it the same way she had walked Jinho through it the day before. Paragraph by paragraph, each flagged clause translated with her notes on the legal language alongside the Korean meaning. Dr. Han listened without interruption. He asked 2 questions. Both were the right ones. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She is correct on all points. The clause in paragraph 18 is not a standard licensing trigger. It is a pathway to termination dressed in ordinary language. Had Mr. Park signed this contract, Whitman Corporation could have claimed full North American licensing control within the first cycle of year 3. Jinho looked at the table. How long to document this formally? He asked. 2 days with full access to the documents, Dr. Han said. I will need everything sent to me by end of day. And I will need a Chicago-based attorney to file any formal challenge on U.S. soil. I will find one, Jinho said. The call ended. Angela and Jinho sat across from each other with the documents spread between them, the afternoon light coming through the high windows flat and clean, no warmth in it, only clarity. Angela went back to the stack of subsidiary documents that had come with the main contract. Corporate disclosure filings, company registration records, historical partnership documents. She worked through them with the same focused patience she had brought to every document in her Monroe Global years. Quiet and thorough and looking for what the surface language was not saying. She found it near the bottom of the third folder. A single page. An acquisition record. A list of companies that Whitman Corporation had taken a controlling stake in over the previous 10 years. It was organized by year and noted the acquisition structure for each. Monroe Global Consulting was on the list. The acquisition date was 8 years ago. Angela read the line again. Then a third time. Monroe Global Consulting had been owned by Whitman Corporation for the entirety of her career there. She set the page down carefully on the table. She looked at the window. She let the information sit in her without trying to move it too fast. The firm that had employed her, the firm that had run the internal review that ended with her termination, the firm that had presented itself as an independent consulting operation for 8 years, had belonged to Gerald Whitman. For all 8 of those years. It was not a coincidence. She knew that immediately, with the clean certainty that comes when 2 pieces of a picture finally touch each other correctly. The same man. The same pattern. Deception, a translator positioned to obscure, someone removed when they got too close to the truth. 2 stories. 1 architect. She sat with this for a full minute. Then she looked at Jinho. I need to tell you something, she said. But not today. I need to go home and think clearly about what I am looking at, and I need to be certain before I say it. Jinho looked at the page she had set down. He did not pick it up. He looked at her. Is it connected to what we are dealing with? He asked. Yes, she said. I believe it is very connected. Go home, he said. Come back when you are ready. She rode back to the South Loop with Mr. Kwan. He sat across from her in the car and said nothing, which she was grateful for. She went up to the apartment. Her mother was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables for soup, wearing her blue housecoat and humming something Angela did not recognize. You look like you are carrying something heavy, Brenda said. I am, Angela said. But I think I am supposed to be. Brenda turned, looked at her daughter with the careful attention of a woman who had been reading Angela's face since the beginning, then turned back to the vegetables. Sit down, she said. Soup is almost ready. You can carry whatever it is after you eat. Angela sat down. She ate soup. She let the warmth of the kitchen settle around her. And she began thinking, carefully and without rushing, about what she was going to say in the morning. Before we go any further into Angela's story, I want to stop and ask you something. You have just watched a woman find, buried in a pile of corporate documents at a hotel conference table, the proof that the same network which destroyed her career 2 years ago is sitting across the table from the man she is trying to protect. She did not scream. She did not run. She went home and ate soup with her mother and thought clearly about what she was going to do next. That is not a small thing. That is what it looks like when a person has earned their own strength through hard years. If this story is sitting with you right now, if you are already asking what happens when she walks back into that hotel suite, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. You do not want to hear this secondhand. And drop a comment below. Tell me, did you see the connection coming? Because Angela saw it. And from this point forward, nothing in that room stays the same. Gerald Whitman's assistant called Jinho's suite the following morning. The message was polished. It expressed regret that the previous Thursday had been disrupted, attributed the confusion to a translation difficulty on their side, and invited Mr. Park and his team to a private dinner at the Whitman Corporation Executive Suite that evening. The tone was warm and confident, the message of a man who believed the situation was still manageable. Jinho read it. He looked at Angela. He does not know how much we have found, she said. No, Jinho agreed. He thinks the problem was Kevin. He thinks if he replaces Kevin with someone he controls more directly, he can still close this. Will you go? Yes. And you will come as my interpreter. Angela wore her deep burgundy blouse to the dinner. The Whitman Corporation executive suite occupied the top floor of a building on Wacker Drive. It had a long dining table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the specific quiet that costs a great deal of money to maintain. Whitman was already there when they arrived, warm and expansive, rising from his chair to welcome Jin-ho with the ease of a man who had spent decades making other people comfortable in rooms he controlled. He looked at Angela once. Briefly. With a smile that performed itself without any feeling behind it. There was a new interpreter at the table. A Korean-American woman named Sandra, in a charcoal blazer, who carried herself with professional precision. Angela noted her carefully. The dinner began pleasantly. Whitman spoke about his company's history and the potential of the AI processing system in the North American market. Sandra translated his words into Korean for Jin-ho's team. Angela listened to both. Sandra was good. She was fast and polished. But she was not neutral. Over the course of the first hour, Angela caught 3 places where the translation went soft in Whitman's favor. When Whitman said that Whitman Corporation would retain significant licensing authority, in year 3, Sandra translated it as, maintain a collaborative licensing relationship. When Hale referenced the default provisions, Sandra called them a standard protection clause. When Whitman described the payment schedule as binding, Sandra gave Jin-ho the impression of flexibility. No single change was dramatic. Together, they drew a gentler picture of the contract than the document actually contained. Between courses, Jin-ho leaned slightly toward Angela and said in Korean, at a volume no one else could have caught, "Tell me what you are hearing." She told him, quietly and precisely, the English and the Korean side by side where they differed. He listened without reacting. He was exceptionally good at that. Whitman watched the small exchanges between Jin-ho and Angela with a smile that never wavered. His eyes, however, were doing careful work. At one point he said with great warmth, "I hope Sandra has been making the evening easier, Jean. I know the language gap can make these conversations feel more complicated than they need to be." It was pleasant. It was also a probe. Angela translated it accurately. Jin-ho said, "Ms. Moore has been excellent. I find direct and precise translation always makes conversations simpler rather than more difficult." Angela translated that too. Whitman's smile stayed in place. But something behind his eyes went very still. The dinner ended without any agreements being reached. Jin-ho thanked Whitman for his hospitality with impeccable courtesy and told him his team would be in touch. They left at 9:30. In the car back to the hotel, Angela looked out at the city lights on the water below the bridge and thought about Whitman's face in the moment when Jin-ho mentioned direct and precise translation. She thought about a man who had spent a long time building something in careful stages, and who was now sitting in the first room in a long time where his usual tools were not working. "He knows tonight did not achieve what he needed it to," she said. "Yes," Jin-ho said. "That makes what we do next more important." "Yes." She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead at the bridge, but his profile was not entirely businesslike. She noted it and left it alone. "I have something to tell you in the morning," she said. "About Monroe Global." "I know," he said. "I have been waiting." She looked back at the window. That night she called her mother. Brenda answered on the second ring and said simply, "Tell me." Angela told her about the dinner, about Whitman, about Sandra. She kept the Monroe Global part for tomorrow. Brenda listened the way Brenda always listened, with her full attention and no interruption. "You sound different than you did last week," she said when Angela was done. "Different how?" "Like yourself," Brenda said. Angela held the phone for a moment, not saying anything. "How are you, Mama?" "I am fine," Brenda said. Then after a pause, "I had a small episode today. Nothing to worry about. My heart did a little thing it does sometimes. I called Dr. Patterson and he said rest and take the medication, and I have done both." Angela went still. "Are you resting right now?" "I am on the couch with a blanket and the television," Brenda said. "Which is as close to resting as I get. I will come home right after tomorrow's meeting." "You will come home when the work is done," Brenda said, with the tone that meant the conversation was not open to negotiation. "I'm not going anywhere. Do the work." "I love you, Mama." "I know that," Brenda said. "Go to sleep." Angela arrived at the hotel at 8:30 the next morning. She wore her forest green blouse and carried a folder with the acquisition document and 3 pages of notes she had written the previous night after Brenda went to sleep. She had spent 2 hours placing what she knew about Monroe Global alongside the new information, careful and unhurried, the way you lay 2 pieces of a picture side by side to see if the edges match. They matched. Minji led her into the suite. Jinho was at the table with coffee. He did not begin speaking right away, which she had come to appreciate about him. He understood that sometimes a person needed to arrive at a table before they were ready to begin. She sat down. She placed the folder on the table. 8 years ago, she said, Whitman Corporation acquired Monroe Global Consulting. I did not know that while I worked there. Almost nobody on the staff knew. It was structured through a holding company, so Monroe appeared independent. But the acquisition is documented here. She slid the page across. He looked at it. The reason I was terminated from Monroe Global, she continued, was because a colleague named Brian Holt submitted my work on a translation project as his own. When I raised the issue, the internal review process found in his favor. I was terminated for misrepresentation of original work, and I signed an NDA that kept me from speaking publicly about it. She paused. At the time, I believed the internal review was poorly run. That Monroe had failed to investigate properly. That Brian Holt had been more persuasive than I was. She looked at the document. But Monroe Global was a Whitman Corporation company. And the translation project I was working on when I was fired was the Park Industries contract. She let that land fully before she said anything more. Jinho looked up from the page slowly. Park Industries, he said. It was an early Park Technologies subsidiary. A smaller company you held at the time. Monroe Global held the contract to handle translation services for your early U.S. market documentation. She watched him trace the same lines she had traced the night before. He has been watching my company for a long time, he said. Long enough to recognize that your technology had real value, Angela said. Long enough to position someone in the translation firm handling your documentation. And to remove anyone who came too close to understanding what he was building. Jinho was quiet. He looked at the acquisition document, then at her notes, then at the table in front of him. You, he said slowly. You were removed because you were working on documentation connected to my company. I cannot prove that specifically, she said. Not yet. But the connection is there. The timing is there. And the pattern is identical in both situations. Someone is placed as a translator, they are given access to sensitive language, and the person being deceived has no way to check what is being said. She sat back. I wanted to tell you because you hired me to be precise. This is as precise as I can be right now with what I have. Jinho looked at her for a long time. She had expected some visible sign of anger. She had expected the controlled quality of him to show a crack under the weight of this. Instead, he was entirely present and entirely still, and when he spoke his voice had the same deliberate quality it always carried. 8 years, he said. He has been building this for 8 years. Possibly longer. And you walked into his restaurant and heard his translator lying. I did. And you said something. I did. He leaned forward and placed his hands flat on the table. Angela, he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the more formal address, and she noticed it without showing that she did. This is not only about voiding a contract. This is a pattern of behavior involving your career, my company, and very likely other people we have not found yet. To address this properly, we need documentation, a legal team, and someone in the room who is not afraid of Gerald Whitman. He looked at her. Are you still not afraid of him? Angela thought about Hale sitting down beside her without being invited. She thought about her mother on the couch with her heart medication. She thought about 2 years of a life made deliberately small. I am afraid of him, she said honestly. But I am not going to stop. Jinho gave a full, deliberate nod. Then let us figure out what we need, he said. They spent the next 4 hours mapping everything they had. Angela translated and cross-referenced. Minji took notes. Jinho made calls to Seoul. By the time Angela left the hotel that afternoon, a plan was in place. It needed one more piece that she would have to find herself. She took out her phone and called a number she had not called in almost a year. Darnell, she said when he picked up. I need your help. Sit down first because what I have to tell you is going to take a minute. Darnell Cooper arrived at the hotel the following morning in a royal blue tie and his best suit, carrying his laptop bag and the expression of a man who had not slept very much but had spent his wakeful hours doing useful things. Angela introduced him to Jinho. Jinho stood and shook his hand and indicated the chair at the table as though Darnell had been expected, which he had. Darnell sat. He opened his laptop. He said, in the measured and practical way that had always been his best quality, "Tell me what you need." Angela told him about the Monroe Global acquisition. She told him about the timeline and the Park Industries contract. Darnell listened and typed as she talked. When she finished, he looked at his screen for a moment. If Monroe Global was a Whitman subsidiary, he said, then the internal review that led to your termination was conducted by a Whitman-affiliated structure. Which means it had a conflict of interest. Which means your NDA was signed under false pretense. Can that be challenged? Angela asked. It can, he said. Especially with the acquisition record and the corporate filing dates. He looked at Jinho. I will need access to the Whitman partnership documents and the subsidiary structure filings. Minji, Jinho said. Minji had already begun organizing the folders. They worked through the morning. Dr. Han joined the video call from Seoul at 11, and by noon they had brought in Gloria Reyes, a Chicago attorney who specialized in corporate fraud, whose firm was on the north side. Gloria arrived in a maroon blazer, assessed the situation with complete calm within 30 minutes of sitting down, and immediately became entirely purposeful, which Angela found deeply steadying. Gloria outlined what they had. The contract fraud case was strong. The deceptive language in paragraph 18, Sandra's deliberate softenings at the dinner, Kevin Cho's documented role. The Monroe Global connection added a second layer, a pattern that could point to a broader fraud scheme rather than a single incident. We need Kevin Cho, Gloria said. A signed statement from him makes this significantly stronger. I will reach out to him, Angela said. That afternoon she sent a message to the number Kevin had used to confirm scheduling with Jinho's team. She kept it short. She said the full scope of what had happened was going to come out. She said she believed his cooperation would matter to how it was received. Kevin called her back in 40 minutes. He did not sound like the polished and practiced man from Table 9. He sounded like someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing in a very small space for too many days. I knew what I was doing was wrong, he said. Whitman's team came to me 6 months ago. They told me it was only a matter of making sure the negotiations moved in a direction everyone could live with. They framed it as a minor thing. It was not a minor thing, Angela said. I know. I knew it then too. I told myself it was not my responsibility to protect someone who had more resources than I would ever have. He paused. And then you walked up to that table and said what you said. And I watched him look at you. And I thought he trusted me completely. I used that. Angela let him be quiet for a moment. Will you give a formal statement? She asked. Yes, he said. Whatever I need to do. He came to the hotel the next morning. Gloria Reyes took his statement over 2 hours, witnessed and signed. Kevin was thorough. He described the arrangement with Whitman Corporation, the amount he had been paid, the specific instructions about which contract terms to obscure, and Sandra's role as a planned backup. When it was done, he looked at Jinho across the table. In Korean quietly he said, I am sorry. I know that is not enough for what I did. But I mean it. Jinho looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for coming, he said. It was not forgiveness and it was not condemnation. It was the kind of response that left Kevin space to carry what he needed to carry without Angela or Jinho adding more weight to it. Angela noted that about him. Darnell spent 2 days pulling employment records from the Monroe Global case through his firm's legal research access. He found the conflict of interest documentation. He found the corporate filing that established Monroe as a Whitman subsidiary 4 months before Angela's termination. He found a reference to the Park Industries project in the Monroe Global billing records, which confirmed Angela as the lead consultant on it. By the end of the week they had a case. Angela sat in the hotel suite on Friday evening after everyone else had gone. The table was covered in organized documents. Jinho came back into the room from a call and found her there. You should rest, he said. I know, she said. I will. He sat down across from her. The city was visible through the windows, bright and moving, all the lights of a November Chicago night. What you have done this week, he said, is not a small thing. I had help, she said. Yes, he said. But it started with you at that service station. Everything that followed started there. She looked at him. There were things between them that had not been named, that neither of them was in a hurry to name, and they both understood this clearly. She could feel that he understood it too. Monday, she said. We end this Monday. Monday, he agreed. The meeting was called as a final negotiation session. Whitman's office confirmed the time with Minji on Friday afternoon and received confirmation back without alteration. Whitman believed he was walking into a room where a week of reset dinners and careful moves had been enough to bring the Park Technologies CEO back to the table, ready to sign. He walked into a very different room. Angela arrived at Whitman Corporation's Chicago offices at 9:45 on Monday morning in her cobalt blue blouse, her dark trousers, and a folder of documents under her arm. Mr. Kwan accompanied her at a respectful distance. Darnell was already in the conference room when she got there. Gloria Reyes was beside him, organized and steady. Dr. Han was on the video call screen at the far end of the table, already connected from Seoul. Jinho arrived at 10. He came in the way he always came into a room, without hurry, without performance. He sat at the head of the table and placed his hands flat on the surface. Whitman and Hale arrived 2 minutes later. Whitman came in smiling. He opened with a broad welcome, a comment about what a productive week it had been, and an expression of confidence that today they would arrive at something that served everyone well. Angela translated every word into Korean, precisely and fully. Jinho listened. He did not respond immediately. Whitman looked between Jinho and Angela. Something shifted behind his eyes. "I would like to begin by sharing something with you," Jinho said. Angela translated. Gloria Reyes placed 3 document packets on the table. One in front of Whitman, one in front of Hale, and one between the 2 attorneys who had come in behind them. "This is a formal legal analysis of the contract presented for signature," Angela said, translating Jinho's words as he spoke them. "It was prepared by Dr. Han Sungjae of Park Legal Services in Seoul, in consultation with Gloria Reyes of Reyes and Associates, Chicago. It documents a series of misrepresentations in the contract language that would have resulted in Whitman Corporation claiming full North American licensing rights to Park Technology's AI processing system within 3 years of signing." She paused with Jinho. "Alongside this," she continued, "we are presenting a signed and witnessed statement from Kevin Cho, who served as the interpreter during the initial negotiation dinner. The statement describes specific instructions he received from Whitman Corporation representatives regarding how certain contract terms were to be communicated to Park Technology's team." Whitman had stopped smiling. Hale was already reading his copy with the controlled attention of a lawyer calculating options. His hands were very still. Angela set down Jinho's notes and moved to her own. "In addition, I am submitting a personal account of events connected to Monroe Global Consulting, a firm acquired by Whitman Corporation 8 years ago, which handled translation services for an early Park Technologies subsidiary. During that period I was employed at Monroe Global as a senior linguistic consultant. I was terminated following an internal review that I can now demonstrate had a direct conflict of interest, given Monroe Global's undisclosed relationship with Whitman Corporation. The termination is connected to my role on the Park Industries translation project. Documentation of the acquisition and the corporate filings is attached." She set her packet on the table. The room was completely quiet. Whitman looked at her. The warmth was entirely gone now. In its place was the face of a man who had spent a long time being very good at what he did and who was sitting, for possibly the first time in years, in a room where his skill was not enough. "This matter," Gloria Reyes said in a clear and even voice, "is being referred to the Federal Trade Commission and to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. Copies of all documentation were filed with both offices this morning." Hale looked up from the document. Darnell spoke next. "The non-disclosure agreement signed by Ms. Moore at the time of her Monroe Global termination is being formally challenged on the grounds of contract fraud, given that the internal review process which preceded it was conducted under an undisclosed conflict of interest. Ms. Moore's professional employment record at Monroe Global is being corrected through that firm's successor documentation." Whitman said, "I would like to speak with my attorneys privately." "Of course," Jinho said. In English. Clear and direct, without hesitation. It was the first time he had spoken directly in English in any of these meetings. Whitman heard it for exactly what it was. Whitman, Hale, and their legal team left the room. The conference room was quiet. Darnell sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. Gloria made a note in her folder. Dr. Han said something in Korean to Jinho that Angela translated internally as "well done," and did not feel the need to say aloud. Jinho looked at Angela. She looked back at him. "You did it," he said. In Korean. "We did it," she said. The legal process that followed would take months. Federal fraud referrals always did. But the contract was void, the documentation was filed, and Gerald Whitman and Patrick Hale were no longer in a position to shape what happened next. 2 weeks after the meeting, both men retained separate criminal defense attorneys, which told Angela and Gloria everything they needed to know about how the referral was being received. Angela's employment record at Monroe Global was corrected within the month. The non-disclosure agreement was declared unenforceable. A formal correction letter was sent to every professional contact in her industry network that had received the original documentation. She held the letter in her mother's kitchen and read it 4 times. Then she set it on the table next to Brenda's coffee cup. Brenda looked at it. She looked at her daughter. Then she picked up her coffee cup in both hands and said, "Now, that is done. What comes next?" Angela looked at her. She had an answer for that. Jinho was in Chicago for 3 more weeks after the Monday meeting. He finalized a new technology partnership with Aldridge Systems, a Chicago-based firm whose CEO he had been introduced to through an industry contact. The Aldridge deal was structured properly, reviewed by Dr. Han and Gloria Reyes, and translated at every stage by Angela. It was signed on a clear Tuesday afternoon in a conference room with bright overhead lighting and a clean table, and everyone in the room understood exactly what they were agreeing to. Jinho signed his name at the bottom of the last page and looked up. He looked at Angela. She was sitting across the table and she had been watching his face, and when he looked at her she felt the warmth of it settle somewhere in her chest, new and also, somehow, not entirely surprising. That evening he asked her to stay after the rest of the team had gone. They sat at the window of the hotel suite. The city was lit below them, white and blue against the dark sky, the lights reflecting on the river, and Angela did not feel, for the first time in 2 years, like a person watching a life from the outside. "I want to offer you a position," Jinho said. She looked at him. "Permanent," he said. "North American Linguistic Liaison and Cultural Consultant for Park Technologies. You would be based in Chicago, with quarterly visits to Seoul as the North American expansion develops. The salary is here." He slid a card across the table. Angela looked at the number on the card. It was not the daily rate from the first week, which had already been more than she had expected. It was significantly more. She looked up at him. "I want to be clear," he said. "This is not a courtesy. This is not a gesture of gratitude. This is a role the company requires, and you are the person I want in it. What you have demonstrated in the past 2 weeks is a standard of precision and care in language that is genuinely rare." She heard every word. She thought about the hazel room, about the emerald green vest and the bread basket and the 2 years of making herself small enough to fit inside a version of her life that was safe. She thought about her linguistics degree in the 8 years at Monroe Global and the fluency in 4 languages she had been quietly, carefully pretending was just something that used to exist. "Yes," she said. "I accept. And I want you to know that I do not have the right words yet for what this means to me, but I am going to say it anyway. Thank you. Not only for the role. For the way you listened, from the very first conversation in that private dining room. I have not had a room where that happened in a long time." He nodded. His expression was the one she had learned to read as warmth, steady and real and entirely present. "There is one more thing," he said. He placed a second document on the table. A letter from Dr. Patterson's cardiology practice, with a note attached in Minji's handwriting. "Minji identified Dr. Patterson as your mother's physician," he said. "With your permission, I would like to arrange for your mother's ongoing cardiology care through a private account I will set up with the practice. It would cover her treatment, her medication, and her monitoring for the next 5 years." Angela looked at the letter. She looked at his face. "I would like to accept that," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, though something behind her eyes was not. "If you are offering it, I accept it fully with my whole heart. She has carried so much. She deserves to be taken care of." "Then consider it done," he said. Angela pressed her hand flat on the table and breathed out slowly. Her mother. Her mother with her cobalt blue housecoat and her Bible and her coffee and her yellow house slippers. Her mother who had told her do the work the night before the most important meeting of Angela's life. Her mother who had not once, in 2 years, told Angela to hurry up and stop grieving or start being something she was not yet ready to be. She was going to be taken care of. Angela sat with that for a moment and let herself feel the full weight of it. Then she looked at Jinho. "You are going back to Seoul in 2 weeks, she said. "Yes. And you mentioned Korea in January." "I did." She looked at him. He looked at her. The city was spread out beyond the windows in all its bright, indifferent enormity, and in the room there was something that had been building since the moment she leaned over his water glass and told him the truth he needed to hear, and it was not only business, and they both knew it. "I have not been on a plane in 2 years, she said. "Korea is worth getting on a plane for," he said. "I imagine it is," she said. She smiled. He looked at her smile the way a person looks at something they had not known they were waiting to see. There was time. There was more than enough time ahead of them, and they both understood that clearly, and neither of them was in a rush. On a clear Friday morning 3 days later, Angela Moore walked out of the Hazel Room for the last time. She had given proper notice, spent a week training the person taking over her tables, and left a card for George Abrams and a longer one for Tomas Rivera. Tomas hugged her at the end of her last shift and did not say very much, which was unusual. Then he said, I always knew you were holding something the rest of us could not even see. You saw it first week, she said. Day 3, he said. You translated the Korean menu for a table that did not ask you to. Just did it quietly like it was nothing. And I thought, this woman is carrying something the size of a whole other life. Angela left the emerald green vest on the back of the server's chair. She walked out into a November morning in Chicago. The cold was clean and direct. The city spread out around her, ordinary and enormous and full of everything that could still happen. She put her hands in the pockets of her red coat. She walked forward.